Hello and welcome to Voices Beyond the Fall. If you have any suggestions for future content, please let me know in the comments. Now let's get into the story, part 1. The Train Car. The rain came down in sheets. John Wright lay on his back in the old Pullman car and listened to it drum against the rusted roof, a sound he'd come to love in the way you love things that keep other things away. Rain meant the walkers stayed sluggish. Rain meant their footsteps were swallowed by puddles and mud. Rain meant he could breathe a little, really breathe, without listening so hard his ears ached. He stared up at the ceiling. Someone had spray-painted a sun there, years and years ago, back when this train car sat behind Millhaven Middle School as some kind of outdoor classroom project. Some teacher's dream of teaching kids history through immersion. The paint was flacking now, the yellow sun peeling at its edges like the skin of a sunburn, but it was still there. John had spent so many nights staring at it that he'd memorized every crack, every blister, every place where the old steel showed through like bone beneath skin. He was 17 years old, and he was alone, and outside the rain was keeping the dead at bay. For now, the train car was 60 feet long and smelled of rust and mildew, and the faint chemical ghost of whatever he'd used to seal the broken windows 3 months ago. He'd found the caulking gun in the school's maintenance closet on one of his early runs, back when he was still green enough to be surprised by what he found in the dark. The windows on the south side were solid now, each one sealed with a bead of gray compound that had dried and held through 2 hard winters and a summer that nearly cooked him alive. The north-facing windows he'd left cracked, just a sliver each, because he needed airflow, and because the north side faced the old soccer field, now overgrown with waist-high grass, and nothing ever came from that direction. He'd learned things in 2 years. That was what survival was mostly, a long, painful education. At 15, John had known how to do homework and throw a decent spiral and make his mother laugh. At 16, he'd learned how to kill. At 17, he was still learning how to live. He rolled onto his side and looked at the small space he'd made his own. The Pullman car had 8 bench seats, 4 to a side, and he'd stripped them all of their rotting cushions in the first weeks, using the fabric to insulate the walls. The benches themselves he'd rearranged, 2 stacked on their sides at the far end to create a windbreak, 3 pushed together in the middle to form a sleeping platform wide enough to stretch out on. He'd found an old camping pad in the school gym, dense foam that had dried out but still cushioned against the steel, and on top of that a wool blanket, a sleeping bag with a broken zipper he'd repaired with safety pins, and a second blanket he used as a pillow. At the near end of the car, closest to the door he used, a side door he'd rehung on a piece of bicycle chain so it swung inward and could be barred from inside with a length of rebar, he kept his supplies. Not much, never as much as he wanted. A milk crate held his food, 4 cans of kidney beans, 2 of diced tomatoes, 1 of peaches in heavy syrup he was saving because they were his favorite and he wanted something to look forward to. A Ziploc bag of jerky he'd made himself from a deer he'd found freshly dead at the fence line, killed by what, he didn't know, but the meat had been good. A box of crackers, half-eaten, stale. A jar of peanut butter with maybe 6 spoonfuls left. A water bottle he'd refilled from the rain barrel he kept outside the east end of the car. Water he always boiled before drinking over the little camp stove that sat on an upturned crate. His fuel supply was the thing that worried him most these days. He had 2 canisters of butane left. When those were gone, he'd need to find another way to purify water, and the options were limited and bad. That was why he needed to go back into the school. He'd been putting it off for 3 weeks. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes until he saw colors and then pulled them away and sat up. Outside, lightning flickered somewhere distant, and 2 seconds later the thunder came, a low, rolling sound like something enormous turning over in its sleep. He counted the seconds between the next flash and its thunder. 5 seconds. A mile away. The storm was moving east. Good, he'd go in the morning. He reached under the bench and pulled out the notebook. It was a composition book, black and white marbled cover, the kind teachers handed out on the first day of school. He'd found a case of them in the art room. He was on his fourth. He wrote every night, not a diary exactly, more like a record, a proof that he existed, that he was still a person who thought and remembered and noticed things. October 14th, he wrote. He kept careful track of the date with a pocket calendar he'd found in the school office, marking each day off each night before he slept. Rain tonight, hard rain. Saw two walkers at the fence this afternoon, a man and something I couldn't tell was a man or a woman anymore, too far gone. They were both moving south along the fence line. Slow, didn't notice me. Going into the school tomorrow for butane or alcohol or anything that burns clean. Also need to check the nurse's office again. I think I missed a cabinet last time. My left knee has been stiff. Could be nothing. Could be the cold getting into it. Dad used to say cold got into his knees from an old football injury, and he'd feel it coming in October. I wonder if he's still feeling it this October. He stopped writing. He looked at the word Dad for a long moment. Then he closed the notebook and lay back down and watched the rain make rivulets on the ceiling and thought about his family until sleep took him. He'd been 15 when the world ended. It hadn't ended all at once, which was the thing nobody in the movies ever got right. It had ended the way a fire spreads through a dry field, fast in places, slow in others, and by the time you understood the shape of it, you were already surrounded. The first reports came in April. A virus. A hemorrhagic fever with neurological components, they said. Then the word reanimation started appearing in news crawls, cautiously at first, surrounded by quotation marks, and then without them. By May, the quarantine zones had gone up in the cities. By June, the cities were gone. John's family had been smart about it. His father, Marcus Wright, was the kind of man who read widely and trusted quietly, and he'd been watching the news with a particular stillness that John recognized, the same stillness he got before saying something important. One night in late April, he'd sat the family down at the kitchen table. John, his mother Diane, his little sister Cassie, who was 11 and kept pulling at the sleeve of her pajama top, and his older brother Darius, who was 18 and thought he already knew everything. "We're leaving," Marcus had said. "Not yet, but soon. We're going to be ready to leave." They'd spent 3 weeks preparing. Marcus and Darius made runs to the store, to the sporting goods place, to the hardware store. His mother had organized everything with a calm efficiency that John had never seen in her before. She was a middle school art teacher, and he'd always thought of her as the creative one, the dreamer. But she turned out to have a mind like a steel trap when it needed to be won. She made lists. She made backup lists. She found an old hand-crank radio and tested it and wrote down the emergency frequencies. Cassie had helped pack, folding things with a precision that surprised everyone. She was small for 11, with their mother's wide dark eyes and their father's stubborn jaw, and she'd been very quiet through the whole preparation, moving from room to room collecting things that mattered to her. Her sketch pad, a collection of small smooth stones she'd gathered from various places on various trips, a photograph of the family at the beach that she slid into a waterproof sleeve she'd found in her father's fishing gear. John had packed his own bag. Clothes, a knife from the kitchen, his father's old compass that he'd been given as a birthday present 2 years ago and mostly used to navigate hiking trails, a paperback copy of The Road that he'd bought at a garage sale and never read. He'd read it 3 times since. They joined a group heading north, the Kendall family from down the street, the Acaffer brothers and their aunt, a retired nurse named Mrs. Pelletier who turned out to be worth her weight in gold for the first 8 months. 12 people in 4 vehicles, moving north in August when the cities had become something from nightmares. For 7 months they'd survived together, moving, camping, finding places to winter. There was a farmhouse in October that had lasted 3 good weeks before they'd heard the moaning in the woods and understood that the farm was surrounded. A school gymnasium in January that had been clean and safe for 2 months before someone left the loading dock door open one night, and they'd lost two of the Okafor's and Mrs. Pelletier's cat and barely gotten out themselves. They'd been moving again in March, John 16 years old by then, thin in a way he hadn't been before, with a watchfulness he hadn't had either when the highway ambush happened. He still didn't like to think about it in detail. There had been people, living people, which sometimes turned out to be the worst kind, on the overpass, and there had been confusion and shouting and vehicles going in different directions, and somehow John had ended up running through a field with Darius 20 yards behind him, and then Darius wasn't 20 yards behind him, and John had stopped and turned and Darius was gone. He'd called Darius's name in a low, urgent hiss until his throat ached. He'd searched for 2 hours, through the cold March dark, and found nothing. Not Darius, not his parents, not Cassie, not any of the vehicles, not any member of the group. He'd been alone since then. He'd found his way back to Millhaven, not by plan exactly, but the way you drift back toward familiar things when you have no other direction. And he'd found the old train car behind the middle school, and he'd thought, just for a few days, until I get my bearings. That had been 13 months ago. Morning came gray and damp, the storm passed, the air smelling of wet earth and something faintly chemical that he'd never been able to identify. It was just the smell of the world now, the way the world smelled since. He tried to describe it in his notebook once, like pennies and wet dog and something sweet underneath that you didn't want to think too hard about. He ate 3 crackers with peanut butter, scraping the jar carefully, leaving the last 2 spoonfuls. He drank half a water bottle slowly, making himself go slowly even though thirst said drink, drink, drink. He checked the rebar bar on the door, tested it, then eased it up and cracked the door 2 inches and listened. The soccer field, grass dripping, a crow somewhere in the old oak at the far corner of the field, wind low from the northwest. Nothing dead. He opened the door and stepped out. The air hit him like cold water, real cold now, October cold, the kind that meant he needed to find more fuel or more blankets or both before the real winter settled in. He was wearing 2 layers of thermal undershirt, a flannel shirt, a heavy canvas jacket he'd found in the school's lost and found last winter. His boots were good hiking boots, barely worn when he'd found them in a sporting goods store 6 months ago, good tread, waterproof. The socks inside them were not so good. He was down to 3 pairs of usable socks, and he'd mended 2 of them with embroidery thread, badly but effectively. He stood outside the car for a moment and turned slowly, looking at every angle. This was something he did every time he left the car. He'd made himself do it even when he was exhausted, even when he was in a hurry, because the few times he'd skipped it, something had surprised him, and those surprises had cost him. The east fence clear. The far soccer field, clear except for the crow, which was digging at something in the long grass that John didn't investigate. The parking lot on the west side, visible through a gap in the school building. 2 cars still there from 2 years ago, sitting on flat tires with their windshields opaque with grime, nothing moving around them. The school building itself, long, low brick, 2 stories. The gymnasium annex on the north end where the loading dock was. The main entrance around front, which he never used. His entrance was the side door on the east face, 3rd door from the corner, the one that accessed the maintenance hallway, which connected to the rest of the building through a series of interior doors he'd propped open or wired open months ago. He pulled the door of the train car shut behind him. He didn't lock it from outside, because a locked door attracted attention in a way that a closed door sometimes didn't, and crossed the soccer field in a low, quick walk, moving through the tall grass, letting it close over his passage. The maintenance door was a heavy steel fire door. He'd removed the panic bar and rehung it on a different bracket so it opened with a pull instead of a push. He'd done this because the original mechanism had started to squeal last summer, and squeal was the last thing you wanted. Now the door swung silently on hinges, He oiled every 2 weeks with a bottle of WD-40 he rationed like medication. He pulled it open and went inside. Part 2. Inside the school. The maintenance hallway was dark. Not completely dark. There were emergency exit signs still lit at either end, powered by some battery backup that had outlasted everything else, throwing the hall in a low red glow that turned everything the color of an old photograph. John had a headlamp on his forehead, a good one with fresh batteries, but he kept it off by habit until he needed it. His eyes had adjusted. He moved by the red light, close to the left wall, stepping in the places he'd memorized. The hallway smelled of mildew and dust and something else, that smell, the Walker smell, but faint, like a memory of it rather than the thing itself. He'd cleared this hallway 4 times since making it his route. He was careful about clearing. He was systematic. He'd read somewhere, or maybe someone had told him, that you had to treat every space like it had never been cleared before, because walkers drifted, because one open door could change everything, because complacency killed faster than most other things. He passed the utility room, boiler, water heater, junction boxes, all useless now, and the custodian's office and the storage area where he'd found the caulking gun and various other useful things. He paused at the T-junction and listened. Silence except for the building settling, which he knew the sounds of by now. Old buildings settled in their own rhythms, creak and groan and tick, a language he'd learned to read. The school's language said, "Nothing disturbed here today." He turned left toward the interior corridor. The interior corridor was the main artery of the school's east wing. Lockers on both sides, most of them standing open. He'd opened them all in his first weeks, systematically working his way from one end to the other. Most had been empty. Some had held useful things, protein bars, forgotten jackets, a first aid kit in someone's locker that had been better stocked than anything in the nurse's office. He'd found a Swiss Army knife, a flashlight, a lighter. A pair of reading glasses that weren't his prescription, but were close enough to be useful for fine work. 3 paperback novels that he'd read twice each. The corridor felt different today. He stopped and held very still, trying to identify what was different. The smell. The Walker smell was stronger here than it had been the last time he'd come through. Not much stronger. He'd learned to trust small differences the way you trust small aches that turn out to be big ones, but noticeably stronger. He switched on the headlamp. The corridor stretched ahead of him, lockers red-lit by the exit sign at the far end and now additionally lit by his headlamp's cold white circle. He swept it left, then right. Nothing in the immediate corridor. But there, the 3rd classroom door on the left was not positioned as he'd left it. He'd left it pushed all the way open and wedged with a doorstop he'd made from a folded piece of cardboard. The cardboard was still there on the floor, but the door had swung most of the way closed. Something had moved through here. John's hand went to the machete on his right hip. He'd found it in the school's drama department, of all places, a prop machete that had been converted to actual use by someone before him, someone who had sharpened the blade and wrapped the handle in electrical tape. He'd resharpened it himself 3 times. It was not a beautiful weapon, but it was quiet, and quiet was everything. He drew it now, feeling the familiar weight of it settle into his palm, and moved toward the door. He pushed it open with his left hand, headlamp scanning. The classroom. Desk still in rows. A whiteboard with faded writing. Tuesday's quiz covers chapters 12-14. A rolling cart of old textbooks. A window on the far wall, its blinds half open, letting in the gray morning light. And in the corner, half hidden behind the teacher's desk, a walker, or what had been a person. It was sitting against the wall with its knees pulled up, and for one horrible moment John thought it was alive, that it was a person. Because the position was so human. But then the light caught its face, and there was nothing human in it. The eyes were the opaque, filmy white he'd seen 1,000 times, and the mouth was working in that slow, purposeless way they had when they were dormant, not triggered, just existing in the horrible space between living and not. The walker's head came up. The eyes found the light. John crossed the room in 4 steps and the machete came down once clean, the way his father had taught him to split wood. Not a chop but a drive, weight behind it, the blade doing the work. The walker slumped and was still. He stood over it for a moment, breathing through his mouth, then wiped the blade on the walker's jacket and sheathed it, and turned to look at the room more carefully. The window. One of the lower panes was broken, had been broken from outside recently, based on the direction of the glass fragments on the floor. So it had come in through the window, which meant there might be more outside, pressing against windows, or there might be one that had wandered in randomly and that was all. He'd need to check the outside perimeter today when he left. Add it to the list. He moved on. The science wing was his destination. More specifically, the chemistry prep room at the back of the science wing, where he'd noticed on his last visit a row of locked metal cabinets he hadn't been able to open. He'd come back for them now with the bolt cutters he'd found in the maintenance storage 3 weeks ago. The science wing was quieter than the main corridor. Fewer windows, most of them the small, high-placed kind that let in light without allowing egress. And the smell was cleaner here. Some residual chemical smell from the labs that seemed to discourage walkers, or at least he'd always found fewer of them here than in other parts of the building. He passed the biology room, the chemistry classroom, the physics classroom where someone had left a single sneaker in the middle of the floor that had been there since his first visit and that he had never moved. He wasn't sure why. The prep room door was propped open as he'd left it. He stepped inside. It was a narrow room, maybe 8 feet wide and 15 feet deep, with countertops on both sides and shelving above. On the counters, beakers, graduated cylinders, safety goggles, boxes of disposable gloves. On the shelves above, more equipment, carefully labeled bins, and at the far end, 3 metal lockboxes with combination padlocks and 1 larger cabinet with a keyed lock. He went for the keyed lock first, because he'd thought about it on the walk here and realized that the right approach was the simple one. The chemistry teacher's desk, 20 feet away in the classroom, had a drawer. He hadn't gone through that drawer before because it had been jammed. He went and wrestled it open now with the flat of the machete blade used as a pry. Inside the drawer, a red pen, 3 whiteboard markers, a half-eaten roll of Tums, rubber bands, a stapler, and a ring of keys. John looked at the keys for a moment, then picked up the Tums. He'd had bad heartburn last week from the canned tomatoes. He pocketed them. The 4th key on the ring opened the cabinet. He swung it open and swept his headlamp over the contents and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Genuine, uncomplicated relief. The cabinet was stocked with supplies for lab demonstrations. 3 canisters of butane, the exact size he used for his camp stove. 2 bottles of denatured alcohol. A bottle of isopropyl alcohol at 90% concentration, which was better than what he'd found in the nurse's office. A box of latex gloves. And on the lower shelf, something that took him a moment to understand. A portable water filter, still in its original box, the kind that used hollow fiber membranes and didn't require any chemicals or heat. He stood very still and looked at the water filter for 3 seconds. Then he unzipped his pack and began loading. He took everything from the cabinet. The butane canisters he wrapped individually in a strip of cloth and cushioned them in the pack's main compartment. The alcohol bottles he nestled between. The filter kit, the gloves, the isopropyl. He was careful and methodical, the way he'd learned to be, not rushing because rushing made you careless and careless got you killed or hurt, and out here hurt was most of the way to dead anyway. When the pack was full, he turned to the combination lock boxes and applied the bolt cutters. The first box held dissection kits and had nothing useful. The second held batteries, AA and AAA, maybe 40 of them, still in their blister packs. He made a sound, involuntary, something between a laugh and an exhale, and loaded them all. The third held first aid supplies, bandages, antiseptic wipes, a blood pressure cuff that was useless to him, but also he held it up and stared at it, a sealed box of suture kits. He taught himself to suture on an orange, practicing over and over until his stitches were neat and even. He'd used the skill once on himself, a deep cut on his forearm from a fence wire in July that had needed closing. These would matter. These could mean the difference between an infected wound that killed you slowly and one that healed. He packed them with tremendous care. He was re-zipping the pack, heavy now, heavier than he'd hoped, when he heard the sound from down the hall. He froze. A walker sound was distinctive. The shuffle, the low moan, the way they dragged sometimes, one foot not quite lifting all the way. He'd cataloged these sounds the way a naturalist catalogs bird calls. What he just heard was not a walker sound. It was a footstep, careful and deliberate and human. His hand went to the machete. He lowered himself behind the chemistry prep room counter and killed his headlamp, and the room went dark except for the thin gray light through the high windows. Silence. Then another footstep, closer, in the hallway outside the science wing. He controlled his breathing, slow and deep, mouth open, making no sound. His heart was hammering, but his hands were steady. He'd learned that trick somewhere in the last year, how to let the heart do what it needed to do without letting it run up into your throat and make you stupid. A figure appeared in the doorway of the science wing. The figure was carrying a flashlight, a real one, bright, and it swept the room in a wide arc. John stayed down, stayed still. The light passed over the counter above his head. "I know you're in there," the figure said. A voice, young female. John didn't move. "I heard you," the voice continued. It was steady, but there was something tight in it, controlled, the way he controlled his own voice when he was scared. "I heard the cabinet open. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just looking for supplies." John weighed this for 2 seconds. He'd encountered living people before. The highway ambush had been living people. There had been a man at a gas station 4 months ago who'd come at him with a tire iron over a bag of chips. There had also been a family, a real family with 2 young children, who'd shared a fire with him in February and given him directions to a cache of food they'd already cleared, unwilling to carry all of it. People could be anything. That was the thing about people. But something in the voice made him stand up. He rose from behind the counter with his hands visible, machete in his right but low, not raised, clearly not raised, and he said, "I see your light." The flashlight swung to him and he squinted against it. "Can you point that down a little?" A pause, then the beam dipped. He could see her now. She was about his age, maybe a little younger, slight build, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid that was coming loose on one side. She was wearing a gray hoodie under a denim jacket and dark cargo pants and boots that were good boots, well chosen. She had a pack on her back, and in her right hand, alongside the flashlight, she had what he recognized as a hunting knife in a belt sheath she'd unsnapped and drawn but not yet extended toward him. She was looking at him with large brown eyes that were doing several calculations at once. "You're a kid," she said. "So are you," he said. A very brief pause. Fair enough. She looked at the pack on his back and then at the open cabinet and the broken lockboxes. "You cleaned this place out." "Most of it. Did you want something specific?" "First aid, medication if there is any, fuel." "First aid and fuel, yes," he said. "Medication, there's a nurse's office on the 2nd floor. I haven't cleared it completely. There were walkers on the stairs last time I went up." She looked at him for another moment. "You know this building?" "I've been in it a few times." Another pause. He could see her deciding something. He waited because he'd learned that pushing people's decisions made them worse. "You waited and let them come to their own conclusions." "I'm Maya," she said finally. "Maya Reyes." John Wright. Part 3, the nurse's office. They didn't talk much on the way to the stairs. That was fine. John had learned that people who'd survived long enough to be where she was, doing what she was doing in this school on this particular morning, didn't need small talk to function. Small talk was a luxury, like a lot of things. You got used to its absence. He led her back through the science wing, through the interior corridor, past the classroom with the dead walker on the floor. He saw her register it as they passed, a slight straightening of her shoulders, and then let it go. At the base of the stairwell, he stopped. "Last time I came up here," he said quietly, "there were two on the landing. First floor to second. They may have moved. They may not have." She nodded, adjusting her grip on the knife. "I go first," he said. "Not because I'm being, just because I know where to step. Third stair squeaks. Eighth stair has a loose railing I use as a grab point. At the landing, there's a window and walkers go toward light. So if they're still there, they'll be at the window first, then they'll turn to us. That gives us a moment." She was looking at him with something he couldn't quite read. "You've thought about this a lot." "I think about everything a lot," he said. "I have a lot of time." She almost smiled at that, almost. "Okay, lead." He went up. The stairwell smelled bad, worse than the main corridor, more closed, the smell concentrated. He breathed through his mouth and kept his weight on the edges of the stairs where the structure was solid. Third stair. He stepped over it. 8 stairs to the landing. The window was there, and through it the gray morning light came in, and there was movement. One walker, not two. It was standing at the window with its back to them, doing nothing, the way they sometimes did when there was nothing to react to. Standing there like a stopped clock. This one had been a man. John still forced himself to think of them in past tense, had been, though it was a mental habit he had to maintain deliberately. He'd been a heavy man, thick through the shoulders, wearing what had once been a button-down shirt with a school logo on it. Maintenance staff, maybe. Or a coach. John could see the badge clipped to his belt, the lanyard, but the name was facing the wrong way. He looked back at Maya and gestured. "One at the window." She nodded, reading him perfectly. He took the 2 remaining steps to the landing in a slow, careful movement. The walker didn't turn. John crossed the landing in 3 steps, close enough now to smell it, an assault of decay that he breathed through without flinching, and swung. 1 stroke, clean. The walker folded. Maya was beside him before the sound had finished, scanning the upper hallway over his shoulder. "Clear," she said. He wiped the blade. They moved on. The second floor was worse than the first in terms of smell, but better in terms of walkers. He'd cleared it more recently. And unlike the first floor, the second floor had fewer ways to drift in from outside. The nurse's office was at the center of the building, a deliberate placement that had always struck him as a good idea, since it put it equidistant from any emergency. The door was closed. He'd left it closed. He opened it slowly, scanning before he entered. The nurse's office was a single room about 12 by 15, divided by a curtained partition into a waiting area and an examination area. Filing cabinets along one wall, a locked medication cabinet on the other, a small refrigerator that was long dead, its contents something he'd removed and disposed of quickly without opening to see what they were. He'd been through the filing cabinets. He'd cut the padlock off the medication cabinet on his last visit and removed what was there. A bottle of ibuprofen basic antibiotic ointment, 2 EpiPens past their expiration date that he'd taken anyway because maybe. What he'd missed, what he'd mentioned to Maya, was that there was a second cabinet, lower, behind the partition, that he'd only noticed on his way out and hadn't had time to check because there had been sounds from downstairs. He went to it now. The second cabinet was not locked. He pulled it open and swept his light over the contents and found a box of Benadryl tablets, a roll of Ace bandages, 2 of them, a bottle of ibuprofen, a large bottle, the institutional size one, still half full, rattling reassuringly when he shook it, a box of Band-Aids, an unopened package of non-stick wound dressings, 4 packets of oral rehydration salts, the kind for treating dehydration, each one in its little foil envelope. and at the very back of the cabinet, 3 bottles. He picked them up one at a time and read the labels. Amoxicillin 500 mg, doxycycline 100 mg, both of them antibiotics. The third was a prescription bottle with someone's name on it, a student's name, some kid who'd left their medication at school, and when he read the label he held it for a long time thinking. It was an EpiPen, not expired. He'd already taken the 2 expired ones. This one was dated 8 months from now. He became aware that Maya was looking at the bottles in his hands. Antibiotics, he said, and heard his own voice doing something odd. He cleared his throat. Good ones. He held them out to her. You should take the doxy, amoxicillin too if you want it. I've got enough. She looked at the bottles. Split them, she said. He looked at her. Half and half, she said. You found them, but I need them too. Split them. He thought about it for exactly 1 second and then said, okay. He found a small evidence bag in the cabinet, the kind the school probably used for confiscated items, and they divided the pills, counting them out on the examination table, and when it was done, they each had a reasonable supply of both antibiotics, and Maya had the EpiPen because she said she had a bee sting allergy that had been severe before the world ended, and it seemed reasonable to assume it still was. Are you allergic to anything? She asked, watching him count. I don't think so. You don't think so? I mean, I was allergic to cats before, but there aren't many cats. She was quiet for a moment. I had a cat, she said, 2 of them. Their names were Ringo and Biscuit. He looked up. She was looking at the wall above the filing cabinet. What happened to them? He asked, and then immediately thought. That was the wrong question. Obviously, that was the wrong question. They died early, she said. Before everything got bad, they were old cats. She paused. That was good, I think. I think that was good. He didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. He finished counting and they packed everything and left the way they'd come. Part 4, Maya. They stood in the corridor outside the nurse's office, packs loaded, and looked at each other in the gray-lit silence. Where are you camped? He asked. She hesitated. Which was the right response, he thought. The right response was always to hesitate. I've been moving, she said. 3 days. I had a place, but I had to leave it. Why? Another hesitation. There were about 8 of them. They came from the northeast, following the fence. My place was inside the fence. He nodded. Walkers following a fence was a thing he knew about. They got stuck on obstacles and then pressed against them, following their length until they found an opening or clustered so thickly they pushed through. My place isn't inside a fence, he said carefully. What is it? An old train car, behind the building, the soccer field. She processed this. He could see her doing the math. Is this person trustworthy? Is this a trap? Is a train car safe? Can I survive another night moving? I want to see it, she said. Obviously, he said. They went back through the school the way they'd come, silent and fast, and out through the maintenance door, and across the wet grass of the soccer field. And John pulled open the side door of the Pullman car and stepped aside so she could look in before he did. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. He watched her take in the space. The sealed windows, the rearranged benches, the sleeping platform, the supply crate, the camp stove on its shelf, the string of small LED lights he'd run along one wall powered by a battery pack he recharged from a small solar panel he'd positioned on the car's roof and wired in through a crack he'd then resealed. You've been here a while, she said. 13 months. Alone? Yes. She stepped inside. She walked the length of the car and back, touching the wall, testing the sealed windows with 2 fingers, looking up at the peeling sun on the ceiling for a long moment. Then she turned and looked at him, still standing in the doorway. I don't have anywhere else to go, she said. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact delivered with a kind of dignity that he respected immediately. No performance of helplessness, No attempt to leverage his sympathy. Just the truth, spoken plainly. "I know," he said, "you can stay." That first evening, after they'd inventoried both their packs and organized the supplies and established some rules, he explained the rules. She proposed modifications. They agreed on modifications, which was the most civilized conversation he'd had in a year. He made a dinner of kidney beans and diced tomatoes heated over the camp stove, adding the last of the jerky for protein, and they sat on opposite benches and ate without talking. The silence was not uncomfortable. He was surprised to find that. He'd thought that another person would make the silence strange, would require filling. But Maya ate the way he did, purposefully, not wasting any of it, and she looked at her own food while she ate, giving him the same privacy he gave himself, and it was fine. When they were done, she washed their cups with a small amount of water, and he told her about the rain barrel and the solar panel. And she told him that she'd been keeping her own camp in the basement of a hardware store 6 blocks east. "Good resources there," he said. "Yes, I couldn't carry everything. We could go back for it." She looked at him. "Tomorrow maybe, if you want to come." "2 people is better," he said. It was simply true. 2 people could watch 2 directions at once. 2 people could move heavier things. 2 people could hear more. "Yes," she said. A pause, the wind outside moving through the grass. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "The notebook in that box." She gestured toward his supply area where the composition book was visible on top of the stack. "Are you writing?" "Every night." "What do you write?" He thought about it. "What I see, what I do, what the date is." He paused. "Sometimes other things." She looked at the notebook for a moment. "I used to paint," she said. "Before. I was taking advanced art at my school." She said the last sentence with a faint, wry edge, the way you talk about a world that has become unrecognizable. "I kept thinking I'd find paints here, an art room." "There is an art room," he said. "Second floor, west wing. I haven't cleared that wing. But the art room specifically, I could see through the window in the door. It looked like it was still stocked." She looked at him. "Watercolors," he said. "I think I saw watercolors. Tempera, definitely. And there are sketch pads in one of the supply closets on the first floor. I found a whole case of composition books in there, and I took them all for writing, but there were also sketch pads." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me until we see what's in there." "Still," she said. He learned her story over the next several evenings, in pieces, the way you learn things from people who have survived things they don't fully want to talk about. She didn't offer it all at once, and he didn't ask. He'd noticed that the people who offered their whole story all at once were often either lying or broken, and she was neither. Her name was Maya Reyes. She was 16, almost 17, her birthday was in December. She'd grown up 30 miles south of Millhaven, in the town of Crestfield, in a house with a yellow door that her mother had painted every year, touching it up in the spring. Her family, her mother, her father, her little brother Tamaz, who was 9, had not been as prepared as John's. Her father had been convinced longer than he should have been that the government would manage it, that the quarantine zones would hold. By the time they tried to leave Crestfield, the roads were already gone in any practical sense. They'd made it 40 miles in 2 days, on foot mostly, hiding at night, before they'd found a house that seemed clear and decided to shelter. The house had not been clear. She described what happened quickly and without embellishment, and then she was done describing it and John sat with it. He didn't say "I'm sorry" because it seemed wrong and small. He didn't say "that must have been terrible" because of course it was, obviously it was, and saying so would be an insult to what she'd lived through. He sat with it and let her have the silence. "I was in the yard," she said finally. "I'd gone to check the perimeter. That's how she stopped, started again. That's why I was the only one who—" "I know," he said. "I went back in, I tried." Her voice was even. "I couldn't." He nodded. How long ago? He asked. 4 months, she said. He thought about the last 13 months alone and tried to project them onto a person who had spent those months also alone, but with a grief this fresh and this total. And the thought of it was like pressing on something deeply bruised. How did you make it? He asked. Not how did you survive, he knew the mechanics of survival, but how did you make it, which was the larger, harder question. She considered this seriously. I was angry for the first 2 months, she said. Angry enough that it kind of kept me going, like I had something to prove. A pause. And then I was just one day at a time. You find a thing to do, you do the thing. The next day there's another thing. John nodded slowly. Yes, he said, that's it exactly. She looked at him. What about you? My family's out there, he said. I got separated 13 months ago. He paused. I don't know if they're alive. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think they are? He'd asked himself this question so many times it had worn a groove in his thinking. My dad is hard to kill, he said finally. My mom is smarter than him about staying safe. My brother, he stopped. Darius got separated the same time I did. I don't know about Darius. My sister is 11 now. He had to stop again. She sounds like a survivor, Maya said carefully. She made her own packing list, he said. At 11, color-coded. Maya almost smiled. Yeah, she said. She sounds like a survivor. He looked at the yellow sun on the ceiling, peeling and faded. I'm going to find them, he said. When things are more settled, when I know where to look. He paused. I've been waiting here thinking I'd hear something, some signal, some reason to move in a direction. But you can wait too long for a reason. Yes, she said, you can. Part 5 days. They fell into a rhythm. This was the thing about survival that the stories never quite got right. It was mostly routine. It was mostly the small, repeated business of staying alive, checking perimeters, sourcing water, cooking food, maintaining shelter, sleeping, waking, doing it again. The dramatic moments existed, sharp and real, but they were islands in a sea of orderly days. The orderly days were not nothing. The orderly days were, in a way, everything. Mornings, John checked the outside perimeter, north and east. Maya took south and west. They met back at the car and reported, and if anything had changed they discussed it and made a plan. If nothing had changed they made breakfast and talked about the day's plan. The first week, they spent 2 days clearing the second floor of the school completely. A tense, careful job that had taken longer than expected because they'd found 4 walkers in the west wing, clustered in what had been the art room. 3 of them went quickly. The fourth, a tall one, faster than usual, which happened with some of them and was always unnerving, had gotten close enough to Maya that John had pulled it away from her by the collar, and that had been a bad moment. The kind that happened fast and ended fast and left your hands shaking for an hour afterward. But the art room was clear after that, and it was stocked exactly as he'd seen through the window. Watercolors, tempera, brushes, sketch pads, paper of various weights, even a set of colored pencils sealed in a tin box. He'd brought her up there on the second morning and stood in the doorway while she walked through it, picking things up, setting them down, touching the brushes with a kind of reverence he understood. The way he felt about his composition books, about the act of writing, about the proof of personhood that putting words on a page provided. Take whatever you want, he said. She looked at him. I can't carry all of it. We can store things here, in the nurse's office, use it as a secondary supply room. He'd been thinking about this. We could also block the stairwell properly, something I should have done a long time ago, make the second floor a more secure space. She considered this. We'd need a way down if something went wrong on the first floor. The window in the history classroom, he said. He'd measured it. It opens enough to fit through. There's a drainage pipe within reach. She looked at him for a moment. You've been thinking about this for a while. I think about everything for a while, he said. I already told you that. She did smile at that one. It was a real smile, brief and real, and it changed her face. "Okay," she said, "let's block the stairwell." They spent 2 days on that project, and it was one of the better 2 days he'd had in a long time, purposeful, productive. Two people working in coordination on a problem that had a solution. They used lockers dragged from the second-floor hallway to create a barrier at the top of the stairs, reinforced with a heavy filing cabinet from the school office that had taken both of them and considerable profanity to move. They wired the lockers together and put the filing cabinet at a diagonal, and when they were done, the barrier would stop anything short of a sustained, organized effort. And walkers, whatever else they were not organized. They went back for Maya's supplies at the hardware store, a morning run, fast and coordinated, moving through the quiet streets. The hardware store had been good to her. She'd found, in addition to various tools, a case of candles, 2 solar path lights whose batteries she'd been using to charge other things, a hand-powered drill that John immediately understood the value of, and a box of those little chemical hand warmers, the kind you activated by shaking, that would be worth their weight in gold when January came. She'd also found, in a back room of the store, a camping pack belonging to someone who'd clearly used the store as a shelter and then been there when something went wrong. She'd cleared the pack of the previous owner's belongings and refilled it. In a side pocket, a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note. She gave it to him without comment. He unfolded it. It was dated 8 months ago, it said. "To anyone who finds this place, I am leaving east toward the highway. There are reports of a survivor community at the Millhaven Fairgrounds. I saw lights 3 nights ago. If you can read this, God bless you, stay safe, and consider heading that way." He read it twice, then he looked at Maya. "The fairgrounds," he said. "I know," she said. "That's 7 miles from here." "I know," she said again. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. That night he wrote in his notebook for a long time. October 28th. We found a note today at the hardware store. Someone wrote about a survivor camp at the Millhaven Fairgrounds. It's 8 months old, which could mean the camp is gone, or it could mean the camp is still there and bigger than when this person wrote about it. M says she wants to investigate. I do too. But I'm also thinking that a camp means other people, and other people is complicated. I've had 2 bad experiences with other people and 1 good one, not counting M, and those are not good odds. But staying in the train car forever is also not a long-term plan. The butane will run out. The food will run out. And I need information. I need people who have traveled, who have seen things. Someone out there might know about my family. He stopped and looked at what he'd written. My family. I said I'd find them. I meant it. I still mean it. But I've been saying it in my head for 13 months without doing anything about it, and saying something in your head is just a habit if it doesn't become a decision. M lost everything, everything all at once. And she's still here, still functioning, still deciding things. I lost my family gradually, first Darius, then the rest, not knowing, and it's like a wound that can't close because I don't know if it's a real wound or not. If they're dead, it's a wound. If they're alive, it's something else, something with no name. I think I need to know. He put the notebook down. Outside, an owl called once, twice, and then was silent. He lay back and looked at the peeling sun on the ceiling and thought, decision. A habit becomes a decision when you name it out loud, when you put it on a timeline, when you let another person witness it. Part 6, November. November came hard, the way it always did in Millhaven. A sharp left turn from October's gold into something pewter gray, and cold that meant business. The first frost came on November 3rd, and John woke up to his breath making clouds above his face and the smell of ice on metal. They'd prepared well. The wool blankets they'd sourced from the school gym's storage and from the hardware store. The chemical hand warmers they'd saved for the worst nights. The camp stove running on the butane from the chemistry prep room. The water filter from the nurse's office supply cabinet meant he no longer needed heat to make the rain barrel water safe, which stretched the butane further. Maya had started painting. She worked in the art room on the second floor, where the light was good through the east-facing windows in the mornings, before the day's tasks began. She'd spend an hour up there sometimes two, and John would give her the space without being asked, because some things you understood without needing them explained. He saw the work occasionally when he went up to check the stairwell barrier or retrieve something from the nurse's office supply cache. She painted from memory, from imagination, the world as it had been, the world as it was, the world in between. A yellow door, a field of tall grass, hands, many studies of hands. On one large sheet of paper, working in layers with the watercolors, she'd made something that he stood in front of for a long time without being able to describe. It was figures in darkness, and there was light at one edge, and the figures were moving toward or away from the light. He couldn't tell which, and the ambiguity was the whole point. She found him looking at it one morning. "That one's," she started. "I know what it is," he said. She looked at it with him for a moment. "Do you want it?" He was surprised. "You should keep it." "I made it. I can make another one." She paused. "I made it after you told me about your family. I thought of you looking for them." He looked at the figures in the near dark, moving toward or away from the light. "Yes," he said, "I want it." He put it in the train car, pinned carefully to the wall above his sleeping bench with two push pins he'd found in the school office, below the peeling sun. He looked at it every night before he slept. The first time they encountered walkers together, encountered and dealt with as a unit, was in the second week of November, on a supply run to the residential street 2 blocks north of the school. They'd seen the house from the school roof with binoculars, a 2-story colonial with a solar panel array on the south-facing roof, which meant the possibility of a charged battery system inside, and a wood pile by the garage door that meant a fireplace or a wood stove. Both things they needed as winter deepened. They'd planned the approach for 2 days, scouted the exterior, identified the 3 walkers visible through the front windows and 2 more in the backyard, made their plan, which was front door, 2 of them, specific targets, specific order, specific retreat route. The front door was unlocked. That was good and bad simultaneously. They went in fast and low, and the first walker in the entryway close, too close, closer than they'd estimated from outside, lunged before John could swing, and it was Maya who drove her knife up through the base of its skull with a precision that stopped it cold. She'd been practicing. He'd seen her practicing late evenings on a bag of sand they'd hung from a tree branch, working on her angles and her force. He'd thought at the time, "She's going to be better at this than me eventually." He thought he was right. 2 more in the living room. John took one, Maya positioned at the door to cut off the other if it went past him. It didn't. 2 minutes, 4 walkers, 5th one in the backyard went down before it could get to the fence. Then they stood in the silent house and looked at each other, both breathing hard, both intact. "Good," he said. "The solar system," she said, already scanning the room. "The wood pile," he said. They spent 3 hours in that house. The solar system was connected to a battery array in the basement, still holding a charge, not full, maybe 40%, but the system was functional, and the panels on the roof would continue charging it, and there were connections they could potentially tap into for running small devices. John made careful notes. The wood pile was seasoned hardwood, split and dry, more than they could carry but enough to plan a return trip for. In the kitchen, they found a pantry that the house's owners had stocked thoughtfully before things went wrong. Canned goods, dozens of cans, organized by type, dried beans and rice in sealed buckets, sugar, salt, baking powder, cooking oil, a row of spices, 2 bottles of maple syrup. Maya picked up one of the maple syrup bottles and held it. "My mom used to make pancakes on Saturdays," she said, not sadly, just saying it. "My mom burned everything she made," he said. She was terrible at cooking. My dad did all the cooking. He made this stew." He stopped. "Tell me," she said. "What?" "Tell me about the stew. I want to know." He looked at her. She was looking back at him steadily. "He made this beef stew," John said slowly. "He'd start it in the morning like 9 or 10 and it would cook all day. He had a cast iron pot he'd had since before he and my mom got married. He'd put in beef, potatoes, carrots, celery, and he had this. He put coffee in it, a cup of black coffee, and that sounds terrible, but it made it taste. It was the best thing. Cassie would ask for it on her birthday. She'd ask for stew on her birthday instead of cake." Maya smiled. "I love that." She was weird about food, he said, and he was smiling too, he realized. The most specific opinions about food of any 11-year-old in history. She'd tell you exactly which brand of ketchup was acceptable. "Which one?" "Heinz only." She was very firm about this. Maya laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and it was startling, real and unprepared. And then he was laughing too. And for a moment they stood in that dead family's kitchen and laughed at a dead world's girl's opinions about ketchup. And it was the most human thing he'd experienced in a very long time. Part 7. The Fairgrounds. The decision to go to the fairgrounds solidified over the course of a week of evenings, built up through conversation the way decisions are built, piece by piece, angle by angle, consideration by consideration, until the shape of it was clear enough to commit to. Maya had been the one to finally say it out loud. "We should go," she said. It was November 15th evening, the camp stove making the car warm and the LED lights making it golden, and they'd eaten well rice and beans and canned tomatoes and the last of the dried herbs from the school's home ec classroom. "We keep talking around it. We should just decide." John looked at his notebook. He hadn't written in it that night yet, and he had the pen in his hand, and looking at the blank page he thought, "All the things I've written in here for 13 months, and now the actual decision is sitting right in front of me." "The camp might not be there anymore," he said. "Yes." "It might be there but hostile." "Yes." "It might be there and good, and we might decide we don't want to stay." "Also yes." She looked at him. "Or it might be there and good and have people who have been traveling, who have heard things, who might know something about your family." He looked at the blank page. 3 days, he said. "We spend 3 days getting ready, packing what we need, sealing this place up so we can come back to it if we need to. Then we go." She nodded. 3 days. He wrote in the notebook, "Decision made." The 3 days of preparation were good days, purposeful days, the kind he always felt best on. They sealed the train car more thoroughly than it had ever been sealed, adding additional caulk to every window, resecuring the door, covering the solar panel on the roof with a piece of plywood that would protect it from weather while they were gone. They stocked the inside with things they couldn't take, the excess canned goods from the colonial house, now carried in several trips and arranged on the bench seats. A note tucked under the sleeping pad where it wouldn't be obvious to a casual intruder but would be findable by them. JW and MR, gone to Millhaven Fairgrounds. Date of departure, November 18th. Just in case someone came looking. Just in case. He took the painting from the wall carefully and rolled it and slid it into a cardboard tube he'd found in the art room. It went into his pack. He took all his composition books, all 4 of them, including the current one. He hadn't gone anywhere without them since he'd started writing, and he wasn't going to start now. They loaded their packs with calculation. Maximum useful weight, minimum unnecessary weight. He'd learned this math through trial and error, and he walked Maya through his thinking, and she modified it with observations of her own, and the final packs were good, heavy but manageable, balanced. On the morning of November 18th, he stood outside the train car in the cold early light and looked at the building and the soccer field and the line of oak trees along the north fence. 2 years of his life in this place. 15 to 17, the years that were supposed to be other things, sports and homework and learning to drive and figuring out who you were going to be. He'd figured out who he was going to be here, just not in the expected way. Maya appeared beside him. She looked at the school building without speaking. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked 7 miles through the changed world. He'd walked longer distances alone, but never like this, never with someone beside him, watching the other side of every street, reading half the world he couldn't read from one direction. The difference was physical, something he could feel in his body, a loosening of the particular tension that came from having to watch everything at once. He still watched everything, but she watched the other half. The town of Millhaven was not devoid of walkers, but it was not overrun the way the cities had been. He didn't know enough about how walkers moved and congregated to understand why some places were worse than others. He just knew that Millhaven had been, from the beginning, manageable. He'd seen evidence that others had come through, cleared buildings, signs of old camps, the occasional useful supply already looted from a place he'd planned to check. Evidence of other survivors, of other people making the same calculations. They went in 3 hours, taking a southern route that skirted the town center and stayed on residential streets where the sight lines were longer and the cover was better. They encountered 2 walkers, both solo, both dealt with quickly and without drama. They passed a dog, a real living dog, a large shepherd mix who watched them from a yard with enormous eyes and then vanished into the brush without making a sound. Maya made a quiet, soft sound when she saw it. "I know," he said. "He was fine," she said. "He looked fine." "They mostly manage," he said. "Better than us sometimes." The dog didn't follow them. He hoped it was okay. The fairgrounds were visible from 3 blocks away, the grandstand roof rising above the surrounding trees, and then, as they got closer, the chain-link fence that had always surrounded the property, and then the additions to that fence. Wire extensions, barriers of various types, what looked like a watchtower constructed from scaffolding at the northwest corner. Lights. Even in the gray November daylight, he could see lights, electric lights, real ones inside the perimeter. They stopped at the edge of the parking lot and looked. "Someone's there," Maya said. "Someone's been there a while," he said. The structures inside were not improvised in the way his train car was improvised. They were substantial. A voice called from the watchtower. "Who are you? State your names and where you've come from." John and Maya exchanged a look. Then John called back. "John Wright and Maya Rays. We came from the school on Birch Street. We found a note 8 months ago that mentioned this place." A pause, then, "Are you armed?" "Yes." "Are you bitten or scratched?" "No." Another pause, longer. Then, "Come to the main gate and wait. Someone will come to you." Part 8. The Camp. The Millhaven Fairgrounds Survivor Community. That was the official name, though everyone inside called it simply the Fairgrounds or, more often, just here. Had been established 14 months ago by a man named Gerald Osai, a former emergency management coordinator for the county who had read the situation early and correctly and acted with impressive organization. There were 63 people inside the fence when John and Maya arrived. 3 longhouses constructed from materials salvaged from the fairground buildings and surrounding properties. A functional kitchen with 2 wood-burning stoves and a propane range with a remaining supply of propane that Gerald was visibly anxious about. A greenhouse built against the south-facing wall of the grandstand, currently growing winter vegetables. A water system that used the fairground's existing plumbing, fed by a well with a hand pump that had been restored by 2 former plumbers who were among the most valuable people in the camp. Gerald himself met them at the gate. He was a compact man in his late 40s with close-cropped gray at his temples and the kind of organized intelligence in his eyes that John recognized. His father had had it. That particular quality of assessment, and he looked at both of them for about 30 seconds before deciding something. "You're young," he said, not unkindly. "We've managed," John said. Gerald nodded. "I can see that. Come in. We have rules and I'll explain them, and if you agree, you stay. If you don't agree, you go, and I'll give you supplies for the road because that's what we do." He paused. "The rules are mostly common sense." The rules were: contribute to the work of the camp according to your ability. Report injuries or illness immediately. No violence against other community members except in self-defense. No hoarding of community resources. Weapons kept accessible but not brandished within the main living spaces. John agreed, Maya agreed. They were given a space in the second longhouse, 2 bunks, side by side, with a curtained area between them and the rest of the bunk row. It was the most privacy the camp offered. It was, by far, the most comfortable space John had slept in for over a year. He sat on the edge of the bunk that first night and looked at the curtain, and listened to the sounds of 63 people going to sleep around him. Quiet voices, the creak of bunks, the sound of someone coughing, a child murmuring something to a parent, and felt something he hadn't felt in so long it took him a moment to identify it. Not safe, he'd never quite felt safe, but held, like he was inside something larger than himself that was, for now, standing. He opened his notebook. November 18th. We made it, the fairgrounds, 63 people. Gerald Ose, I runs it well, I can tell already. The longhouses are solid, the greenhouse is smart. The water system is the single most impressive thing I've seen since the outbreak. 2 plumbers. I keep thinking if I could find specific people, what they'd be worth. He stopped writing and thought, specific people. He put the pen down and pulled back the curtain between his bunk and Maya's. She was on her back, looking at the ceiling. "Maya," he said quietly. "Yeah. Tomorrow I'm going to ask Gerald about my family. See if he's heard anything, if any travelers have come through." A pause. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to ask specifically about the highway ambush, about where people were moving last spring." "Okay," she said again. "And if I get information," he said, "I'm going to want to follow it." Silence for a moment. "I know," she said. He pulled the curtain back and lay on his bunk in the dark, and listened to the camp settle into sleep around him. The next morning, Gerald's office, which was a repurposed ticket booth just inside the main gate, surprisingly tidy, with a map of the surrounding 50 miles on the wall covered in notations in various colors of marker. John described his family. Marcus Wright, late 40s, a big man, 6'2", dark-skinned with a gray streak at his left temple. Diane Wright, shorter, natural hair, a teacher. Darius Wright, 18 when they'd separated, built like his father. Cassandra Wright, 11, Cassie. He described them carefully, the way you describe people when the description matters. Gerald listened. His eyes went to the map while he listened, and John watched them move, following some internal logic. "The highway ambush in March," John said. "The overpass on Route 9 about 12 miles west." Gerald nodded slowly. "I know the area. I've had 3 groups come through who passed that way. One of them," he stopped. He turned to a filing cabinet and opened it and pulled out a notebook of his own, a spiral-bound one, and flipped through it. "March, Highway 9 area." He ran his finger down a page. "A group came in from the west in June. They'd been in that area in March and April. They mentioned," he read carefully, "they mentioned a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 younger people, who were part of a larger group that got separated at the Route 9 overpass. They said the family was alive and heading northeast when they last saw them. April." John went very still. "Northeast," he said. "Northeast," Gerald confirmed. He looked at John directly. "That's all I have. It's 7 months old." "Northeast," John said again, "from Route 9. Gerald's finger moved on the map. "Northeast of Route 9 would take you toward the Addison Valley. There are communities up there. I've had word of them, secondhand. There's a place called the Addison Ridge Settlement that's been sending people out for information gathering. They might know more." John looked at the map. He looked at the red lines and blue lines, and the notations in Gerald's careful handwriting, each one representing a person or a group or a piece of information, the whole map a record of the world's survivors trying to find each other in the dark. His family had been alive in April, 8 months ago, and they'd been alive and moving northeast. He breathed carefully, deliberately, the way he'd learned to breathe. "Thank you," he said. The camp was good. He wanted to be honest about that, now and later, and in his notebook where he wrote it clearly. The camp is good. Gerald is good. The people are mostly good. There was a woman named Priscilla who ran the greenhouse with a combination of scientific precision and genuine love of growing things that resulted in winter lettuce and kale, and even, somehow, radishes. There was a teenager named Quame who was teaching himself to play guitar from an instruction book, and who practiced every evening after dinner in a way that was initially grating, and within a week had become the sound of home. There was a little girl, 5 years old, named Ruth, who had attached herself to Maya with an intensity that Maya bore with a gentleness John had suspected she was capable of. He stayed for 3 weeks. They both did. 3 weeks of eating real meals, of sleeping in a bunk, of contributing. He fixed things mostly. He had a talent for mechanical problem-solving that had been untapped before the outbreak and had become essential after it. He retensioned the fence in 3 places. He solved a recurring problem with the water pump seal. He organized the supply room in a way that made inventory faster, which everyone agreed was immediately useful. Maya started teaching the camp's 6 children. Art primarily because that was her gift, but also reading and math because the children needed them and no one else was doing it. She was good at it, patient and structured, and genuinely interested in what each child did with the materials. Gerald noticed and told her she was valuable, and she'd received this with a small nod that said, "I know, but thank you for saying it." 3 weeks, and John found himself looking northeast. He knew it was time when he dreamed about his father's stew. Not the fact of it, the smell of it. He woke up with his face wet and the smell of coffee and beef and bay leaves in his nose, so real it took him 30 seconds to accept that it wasn't. He lay in the dark of the longhouse and listened to the camp breathing and thought, "I could stay here." The thought was honest. He could stay. It was safe, or safer than anything he'd had. There was food. There was community. There was a future being built. But they are northeast of Route 9. They have been moving for 8 months. And I don't know where they are, and they don't know where I am, and every day I wait is a day further they might travel. He pulled back the curtain. Maya's bunk was dark. Her eyes were open. "You've decided," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." A long pause, the camp breathing around them. "Me too," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to come with me." "I know. You have something here. The kids need you. Gerald needs you." "Gerald will find someone else," she said. "The kids will be okay." She paused. "Addison Ridge, the Addison Valley, that's not a direction I choose to go alone." Another pause, "And I don't want to." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't want you to come because you feel like you have to protect me," he said carefully. She looked at him with those large brown eyes, steady and clear. "I'm coming because you're my person," she said simply. "You're the person I'm going with. That's the decision." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Okay." "Okay." He pulled the curtain back. He reached for his notebook in the dark, found it by feel, found the pen. He wrote November 21st. "We leave in the morning. Northeast. Addison Valley. Addison Ridge. 63 people here at the fairgrounds, and Gerald will grow it to 100 before spring, and this place will still be here when we need it to be. But tomorrow we go." He paused. "My father makes a stew that my sister asks for on her birthday. Cassie is 11, 12 now, if she's had her birthday. She has opinions about ketchup. She made a color-coded packing list at 11 years old. My mother taught art and had a mind like a steel trap when she needed it to." My brother Darius ran track and thought he knew everything and was, increasingly, right. I am 17 years old and I have survived 2 winters, and I have learned things I would not have chosen to learn but which I am glad I know. I have learned to read a building by its smell and a person by their hesitation. I have learned to boil water and suture wounds and move through the dark without sound. I have learned that people are mostly trying, and that some are worth trusting, and that the ones worth trusting will show you themselves honestly and without theater if you give them time. M showed me herself. She is the bravest person I know, and she is coming with me. I don't know what we'll find in the Addison Valley. I don't know if my family is there. I don't know if they're still alive. But I know that my father is hard to kill, and my mother is smart, and my sister made a color-coded packing list and took a waterproof sleeve for the photograph. And I know that the people who prepare are the people who survive. They survived. I believe they survived. Tomorrow I'll go find out. Epilogue before dawn. They got up before the rest of the camp stirred. Gerald was already awake. He was always the first awake, the last to sleep, the person who held the weight of 63 people on his back and did it without complaint. And he met them at the gate with 2 packs of supplies from the community stores, food for 4 days, an extra map with Gerald's notations on it marking the safest routes northeast, 2 hand-crank radios with a note of the frequencies the fairgrounds monitored. He looked at them for a moment. "I'm not going to try to talk you out of it," he said. "Good," John said. "I'll try to talk you into coming back," Gerald said. "After, whatever you find or don't find, there's a place for both of you here." John nodded, Maya nodded. Gerald opened the gate. The world outside was pre-dawn dark, the sky in the east just barely differentiating from black to a deep, bruised blue. The air was cold and still and smelled of frost, and very faintly, pine, from the tree line to the north. A bird called somewhere, a kind of bird he didn't know the name of, a whistling call that went up at the end. They stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked northeast. The road stretched out in the early dark, frost glittering on the pavement where his headlamp caught it, the tree line on both sides dark and still, the sky beginning its slow shift from blue to gray. "How far to the Addison Valley?" Maya asked. Gerald said 40 miles. 2 days if the roads are clear." 2 days, he said. She adjusted the straps of her pack and settled it on her shoulders. He did the same. He felt the weight of the composition books, all 4 of them, the rolled painting in its tube, the food and the medical supplies and the tools and the water filter. He thought about a yellow door repainted every spring. He thought about the smell of stew on a Saturday. He thought about a small girl's careful handwriting on a color-coded list, and a waterproof sleeve for a photograph, and the particular stubbornness of a family that prepared. He thought, they're out there, and now so am I. "Ready," Maya said. John Wright, 17 years old, took a breath of cold November air and looked northeast at the road and the dark trees and the beginning of the sky. "Yes," he said. They walked,